Hi, thanks so much for joining Salpo Technologies webinar on getting ready for GDPR and how to get ready using the Salpo Technologies solution. GDPR is coming whether you're ready or not. The law is going into place on the 25th of May, 2018. It's affecting all businesses that handle, manage, store, interpret EU personal information data. The fines are big. It's 20 million euros or 4% of your turnover, so please do take this seriously. And there's a lot to do getting caught up or in preparation for the law going into place. We recommend that you visit the ICO website for full details. The Salpo website, salpo.com, has a good amount of guidance and information on GDPR and what our solution can provide, but definitely visit the ICO website for full details on what the law entails and what you need to do to get ready for GDPR's release on 25 May 2018. The Salpo compliance tools offer a practical solution to getting GDPR ready and proactively managing the consent of your contacts. When you navigate to the ICO's website, you'll see a list of the 12 different steps that you can do to prepare your business for becoming GDPR compliant. Salpo has addressed each one of these 12 steps. They range anywhere from making your staff and customers aware about GDPR, all the way down to assigning your data protection officer's information and making that visible to your clientele. On the right side of the screen here, you can see how we can help with each one of these steps as you're navigating this process in preparation for GDPR. So next, I'm going to show you the Salpo solution. So right now, this is the Salpo homepage dashboard. This is customizable, so each user of the system will have a different dashboard view when they're logging into the system, and we'll have a little bit closer look at this as we go through the webinar. So the first step when talking about GDPR and managing the consent of your contacts is importing that contacts data into Salpo from either a CSV spreadsheet or your current provider. Salpo has an import tool. To ensure you're being GDPR compliant, you need to enter in a source of where this data came from, how it was obtained. Now that you've imported your data, you want to see the consent that's stored against each one of your contacts. So if I navigate here to one of our contact profile pages, you'll see that consent is required against specific data points on her profile page. So these are all personal information details. So that entails anything like email, telephone, address, but you can also apply requiring GDPR consent against any custom fields in your system. So this could be when you're obtaining any personal information like a driver's license number, a passport number, marital status, things like that. You can easily view the consent status by the color when you're looking at each one of these. So I can see that green here, and that means that the consent has been granted. Red consent G means that it's been declined, and a gray G means that consent is unknown. These colors help users view the GDPR data in real time. You don't want to be reaching out to someone who's already declined their consent, but it's not updated in your system. So understanding the overall status of that data in real time is important. G consents display on profile pages to alert of consent, but you can also see that information on the dashboard in an overall picture. So you can see a total of the consent status of your contacts in your system, but you can also see that in graphical distributions. You could use a workflow widget to say, show me everybody who's been sent a consent email, show me everybody who's responded, show me everybody who's still left as unknown. And if I'm the compliance officer, I may want to have this displayed more prominently on my screen so that it's the first thing I see when I log in. Now that you know how to view GDPR consent data within the Salpo system, you want to understand what you can do with it. Next step would be communicating with your contacts based on their consent. So if you navigate to a contact list view page, you can see here that I've filtered on how did these contacts hear about us, and I've selected website and social media. I've also chosen to show an email option to display any contacts that have granted their consent for me to communicate with them on their email address. Now I've filtered to identify that target audience. I could use this list for marketing or telesales. So instead of using that email address, I could filter to show any of my telephone numbers where consent has been granted and pass that list on to my telemarketers to then quick call and reach out to those contacts. I can also track overall consent by using these drop-down fields to understand where my consent status is. When you turn GDPR on in Salpo, we pre-populate some standard GDPR detail custom fields. So that way you get full visibility on what the status is of that contact's GDPR consent. So you can track and see if that consent email's been sent, if they're in contract and in contract till, which is important because if you have a customer in contract with you, then you do have legitimate interest or legitimate reason to be communicating with them, which is important because you do need to have a contact point for that contact if they're still in contract with you. You can also see things like legitimate interest, source, and the marketing opt-in or not, and filter based off of that information. This is what will help us understand how much of our database is compliant and then show that distribution of the GDPR consent against those contacts. All of that is done using the GDPR fields and any of those consent fields. You'll see here, like when I click down on that email drop down, I'm not just filtering by a specific email address, though I could if I wanted to put that in there, but I can also filter by any of these GDPR consent fields that have been provided here. So I can see if consent's been granted or not, the date and time consent was granted, the source of how we obtained consent, and then any other descriptive notes. Next is linking a contact to a privacy statement. You can create, view, and update privacy statements from within Salpo, and then they display just like any other object within the system in a list view page. When I click on this View Privacy Statements option, it will open a list of all of the privacy statements we have stored and built within the system. I can then edit and manage a privacy statement by clicking on it. I can identify and store the date it was created. I can store the full statement here in the content box. I can also store it as a file against this profile page so that it's easy for any of my Salpo system users to access the most recent privacy statement and read it aloud if needed, or download it and share it with a end user or customer. I can see which is the most active privacy statement and what version it is. And if I have any other specific custom details that I need to track against a privacy statement, I can store that all within this specific profile. As I'm then evolving or managing my privacy statements, I'm able to track all of the amendments made. I can then send consent emails based on these results to update consent. So if we jump back to a contact list view page, under this connections dropdown, I can filter by contact accepts privacy statement. You'll see all of my contacts that have accepted a privacy statement. I then have the option to filter by the date of connection or any of those other custom fields we've created against the privacy statement. I can also cleanse data based on their compliance. So under our actions drop down here, I can bulk remove and update data and also bulk schedule communications if needed, as reminders to say follow up with this person because we need to obtain consent. Now that you've used the contact accepts privacy statement connection to show which statement the contacts have consented against, you can send consent emails based on those results to update their consent. That process would be using our GDPR Compliance Assistance tool. The features that you've seen so far, which are manually adding consent against contacts and tracking that information, filtering that data via the list view pages, and connecting them against a privacy statement, is all the manual process, which is just the GDPR feature. The second solution that Salpo has provided is the GDPR Compliance Assistance tool, which automates all of the GDPR features for you. So the next step in using the Compliance Assistance tool would be sending a bulk message out to any of these contacts to update their consent. I'm going to filter down to show specifically Addison's name as a result and have the message sent to her, since that is the test contact in this scenario. From here, I'm going to use the Actions drop-down and click Send Consent Emails. This then asks me to confirm to send those emails out, and I'll say yes, and two things happen at that point. I'm going to get an email confirming that the email went through successfully, but then Addison's going to get an email requiring that she log into our portal to define her consent. Once Addison's received her personalized email, which contains this unique and time-sensitive link, she'll be able to access the portal, where she's able to manage her consent. Clicking on that link will take me to the consent portal. It starts off with a templated introduction, and then it displays the privacy statement that we've created within the Salpo system. Addison can then scroll through, confirm that she's read that privacy statement, and then as she scrolls down further, she'll see all of the information that we have stored on her within the CRM. If you remember from earlier, all of her contact details had been granted consent except for her address, which she had denied consent for. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and change that to show granted. And then I'm going to leave everything else as it was. And then just click on Submit. Upon clicking Submit, Addison will get this confirmation that her content details have been updated within the CRM. So if I now navigate back to Addison's profile and give the page a quick refresh, I'll now see that that address G has gone from red to green now that she has provided us with her consent to store that data. And you'll see that G marked right here. You can manually edit and override any of these preferences though by clicking on one of the G's to see that data displayed within the system. This is the GDPR setting for specifically her address, and you'll see that the consent says granted with today's date and time that this webinar was recorded, and the source will automatically populate to online portal because that's where she just submitted her consent, and it pre-populates with the default description as well. I can now change this though and override those features so that we're staying up to date and understanding her compliance in real time. So let's say she just reached back out and said, actually, I'm no longer at that address. I need you to remove it from your system. We can change the consent from granted to denied, update the date of which she supplied that consent, and update the time if necessary. We can then change the source and say she called in and put any descriptive notes in saying moving address and hit done. That will then update that GDPR detail to now be read. This provides full transparency with staff and users and allows you to update a field when necessary. All additions and changes are date, time, and user stamped within the system, which is also reportable as part of an activity log within the Salpo system, whether that data was added via the portal or manually by a Salpo user. So you can see all of that reflected here in the recent activity log on Addison's profile page. There's also a full system activity log that any control panel users have access to where they can audit that information. So then if the ICO ever does come and request some details regarding when consent was given and how, you do have access and are able to track that information. Now that you've stored all of this data, the next step would be exporting it into another software system that you're using if necessary. To export the data out of Salpo, I'm going to navigate back to that contacts list view page, and under my actions dropdown, I have an export to CSV file option here. As soon as I click on that, the pop-up window asks for a destination. This is part of turning GDPR on because we do have to confirm that the data is going to a GDPR compliant destination. Upon exporting the data, our data protection officer, as well as any other control panel users, will get an email confirmation notifying them that data has been exported out of the CRM. This is to make sure that they are aware of any transitions of data across the system. When you're exporting the data, you have the option to export only the selected columns, or you have the option to export all custom fields stored against those contacts. As soon as you've entered in your destination, you just click yes, and then the data will export out of the system, and you'll receive an email upon its completion. Now that you've seen how to import your contact data into Salpo, mark consent against specific profile pages, how to understand that data in real time, communicate with your contacts based on their consent, track an overall consent, link your contacts to a privacy statement, cleanse your data based on their compliance, manually edit and override any preferences, and then export data out of the software, you're ready to go. So what's the price breakdown of Salpo's solution? The GDPR pricing for any of the manual GDPR tools that we showed you, it's £25 per month per user. It comes as part of our silver license. The automated process of GDPR is £100 per month per system. Once the GDPR CAT feature has been turned on, it is accessible across all users for your account. So what's next? We recommend setting up a one-to-one GDPR demo of the system so we can take you through this in a little bit more detail. If you haven't already, sign up for our free 14-day trial, and then you can sign up for a plan to maintain access to those features as well as managing the consent of your contacts moving forward month by month. Please reach out to us with any questions at gdpr@salpo.com or contact us using the phone number on the screen. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to working with you soon.